So for more now on both the Strzok and Woodward stories, let's bring in our panel tonight. Dave Brown, Democratic strategist, Buck Sexton, former CIA analyst, and Steve Hilton, host of The Next Revolution right here on Fox News, also the author of Positive Populism. Gentlemen, thank you all for making time to be with us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with Strzok and Page. You know, Catherine outlined exactly the back and forth on this and what's been happening. Here's what Mark Meadows tweeted. He says, to sum it up, the timeline, April 10th. The 2017, Strzok texts Lisa Page wanting to discuss a media leaking strategy. 2 days later, Strzok texts Lisa Page that 2 articles are coming out about her namesake, Carter Page. Then 10 days later, Strzok texts Page, article is out, exclamation, and well done, Page. Steve, what does that say to you?
I mean, look, if what that lawyer is saying is true, and this was really referring to a department-wide strategy to prevent leaks, it wasn't a very successful strategy, was it? Because you've seen leaks all over the place. I think it's clear to me that that lawyer is just spinning. It's pretty clear that I think that Meadows is right. But I think there's a bigger point as well, because this is just the latest in a drip, drip, drip of stories coming out that indicate that there's at least grounds to suspect that those working in the Obama Justice Department and elsewhere in the system prior to the election and immediately after the 2016 election were out to try and either prevent President Trump from being elected or to mess around with the election afterwards. And until there's a proper, thorough investigation equivalent to the Mueller investigation into all of that, I think you're going to find whatever happens here, half the country are just going to feel that justice isn't done and the whole thing is rigged.
Dave, I'm guessing you may have a different take on this.
I do. Here's my question. Why didn't Congressman Meadows release all of the relevant text messages? This is another example where he has very conveniently and opportunistically cherry-picked messages out of context and then selectively released them to the public to paint a story.
Feel like he says in his letter to the Deputy Attorney General, he says any reasonable person reading these things based on this consecutive timeline with articles coming out, that would make sense to a reasonable person that there was more to this.
I learned in law school, Shannon, that a reasonable person is always an aspirational goal, so I'll let that sit. But here's what I know. I know that Congressman Nadler and Congressman Cummings said today that if you look at the text messages in totality, in fact, they're not referring to a news article about Page, rather they're talking about an article
about the same day
about Comey. So again, a reasonable person could also infer that, in fact, they were talking about a profile that she had worked on.
Let's get back.
I mean, context matters. We should release all of the text messages.
It does. And there are a lot of things now. There's a lot of pressure by the House GOP on the president to release a lot more involving these cases. And as president, he could do that. There are questions about why he's hesitated, but they're now really starting to think in the next couple of weeks there are going to be more things related to these documents and these investigations that will be released.
I think the president absolutely should release more of the information about the FISA applications on Carter's Page specifically. I think he's going to, by the way. I think it's important that the American people know the full truth, or the fullest truth that they can about that, before they go to the polls in this instance, because of all the misinformation around it. And, you know, one thing I learned in the CIA, we had a media leak strategy as well, if it was to prevent it, which is don't leak. So the notion that somehow this was a conversation about stopping leaking is utterly preposterous. And when you look at the backstory here and the history of what's gone on, you have a bunch of individuals who were trying to craft a very specific narrative, which was about Russia collusion. Russia collusion depended on somebody being a pretext for a surveillance operation that, quite honestly, I've spent a lot of time talking to Carter Page about this. It is laughable that this guy required FISA surveillance. It is laughable that this went on several times beyond the first instance. And it's also really damaging to our civil liberties. And people should be much more concerned about that than they have been, but it gets Trump, so they kind of just push it all aside.
Hang on, though. At least specifically with Carter Page, the FBI had initiated an investigation into his activities well before the 2016 election.
He'd also cooperated with the FBI before.
He may very well, but I think as we like to say on the show, facts matter, and we need to understand the chronology here. This investigation began well before Donald Trump announced that he was president, and for any of us to imply that somehow there was a political calculus in why Carter Page was targeted, I think ignores the fact that there was an investigation the FBI had begun well before.
We don't know. That's the problem. And people are suspicious because of all these, there's accumulating pile of evidence. That's why
I actually agree. We should release it. I don't have a problem with that.
We should have more transparency. Every time there's going to be more transparency, Democrats say, "Oh my gosh, sources and methods," which usually isn't a problem when they're leaking other stuff to the press. And on Carter Page specifically, just talk to him about what they thought he was doing. I mean, it's silly. It's not serious stuff.
He's yet to be charged. So
with anything ever.
Yes, so we'll wait on saying that. But I like that you all agree on something. At least release more of the information so there's more transparency. I want to make sure that you all get a bite at this Woodward thing today, though. We have more denials, including from former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who's mentioned in the book. He says, to be clear, a number of the statements attributed to me and from others to me in the Woodward book are incorrect. I would have been happy to correct them if Mr. Woodward or any member of his staff would have called me as a person they were quoting for standard fact checking. Dave, fair point?
So here's the thing I find really interesting about this. Bob Woodward in the past has been criticized as being almost a stenographer as opposed to a journalist, right? He's so meticulous in how he simply
recites. If you're meticulous, why not call people who are quoted?
Well, Shannon, my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding is he also taped a lot of these conversations. So I think it's kind of interesting when you look at how folks are walking back their participation. They're not necessarily specifically quarreling with any particular passage. And so, if there are tapes, let the tapes speak for themselves.
And some of these are anonymous quotes, quotes attributed to anonymous, attributing them to someone else. Yeah. So we'll see. I want to make sure we get you both quickly to weigh in too.
This notion that you can rely on people to tell you what was said, that other people said in a room, and you wouldn't try to follow up on this, I think is silly. And it really just proves that he's trying to push a narrative here, as he has in previous books. This is not new. And he's relying on secondhand sources.
You're an author, Steve.
No, look, I am, and for good reason, because what this shows is that actually the thing that a lot of us have said all along, that there's a group of people who are attached to the old regime, the elitist way of doing things. They don't like the fact that here's a president elected.
Republicans and Democrats.
Exactly, to shake things up. They want to stop him. And people like Gary Cohn have been running around boasting to their friends in the elite about how they are holding back this crazy president from doing the things they won't like. They don't like it when they're caught. That doesn't mean it's not happening. And I think what it really shows is that the president needs more populist allies and more populist ideas to shake things up along the lines he promised.
Well, Woodward has said a lot of folks speaking out now are making political statements in order to protect their careers. So we'll see. We'll see if we get the tapes. We all agree for more transparency on both of these topics.
Woodward sources tend to be the people who look good in his book. So that's another way to go.
Well, luckily we all stayed out of it. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming in. Good to see you.
Thanks a lot.